Hello, and welcome to another top 5 list. This week we're taking a look at top 5 albums, or top 5 live albums to be more precise. And it's a nice follow-on from last week's top 5 list because I looked at best live gigs, so it's a nice natural progression to look at my top 5 live albums. Now, one thing you'll notice with this is the release dates on these, the time frame that these albums was released. So I got 5 albums and then an honourable mention, and all of them were released sometime after around 1978, and I had bought them sometime after the release date, obviously, but probably no earlier than 1979, right through to about 81. So it was a sort of period from my last few years at school to when I started work. And so prior to starting work, I didn't have a lot of disposable income, and any money I had was either as a result of birthday money or working like a part-time job during the summer. I did a bit of gardening, worked for my dad on the building for a while during summers. So what I noticed tended to happen is that a live album was a good way of getting a feel for a band that you had already got some exposure to but didn't have any of their albums. So, obviously the exposure to them would have been through the radio. And if you've listened to my podcast on Spotify, my Music Obsessions podcast, I go into a lot more detail about, certain years in my life when I listen to certain music, where those music discoveries occurred. But yeah, live albums are an interesting commodity, and they, to me at least, appear much more popular back then than maybe they are now. After all, everything now you can stream, so you don't have that scarcity issue so much. But yeah, a live album was a great way into a band where the band didn't necessarily have a compilation album, or you didn't want to buy the compilation album because you then knew probably later on you were going to rebuy or buy an album which had that track on it, and it was nice to have like the live version and the studio version. Well, that's just the way I used to rationalise it. So with my top 5 here, I've put them roughly, well, they're in release date order, but not the order that I bought them, and not necessarily, any ranking from 1 to 5, because with this first, the 5 here, discounting the honourable mention, these easily could be, any one of these could be my top one, my all-time top live album. Again, just depending on when someone asked me that. All of these I've listened to on numerous occasions. And the Thin Lizzy one, I've also watched the accompanying video, which I'll talk about in a moment, alongside this. There's no, countdown where I've got people guessing. You can see already what they're going to be. Again, with these videos, for me, it's more about the storytelling, like how maybe I discovered the band, or little bits of my life around listening or purchasing the album, which, hopefully you find interesting. It adds a bit of backstory to a list, and maybe looks at lists in a slightly different way than a lot of people might deconstruct a list. Also, I've noticed, I think, Majority of these are double albums, not surprisingly, but not all of them. And obviously many of them have been extended over the years through CD releases and various other things. So first up, let's have a look at Live and Dangerous. So this originally came out in 1978. My first exposure to this, I'd seen the album like a lot of times as a teenager. I'd be walking past Woolworths or some other like a record store, somewhere like that. And this was one of those albums where you could bet when this came out there would be like this massive shop front display with multiple copies of this and a big poster, all that sort of thing. And I think that's the case with all of these albums. Probably got that particular treatment in them. But from recollection, and it does mention it down here, they did record some footage at the Rainbow Theatre to accompany the release of this, but it never got released at the time. And then it crept out on VHS in 1980. Now, sometime I'm just trying to think when it would have been, I saw this performance, and I'm having real trouble as to whether it was shown on the TV. I know I definitely saw it on VHS at like one of my local video stores, but that wouldn't have been till 81, and I know I had the album before then. So either I'd seen this on the TV, and maybe it did go out on the TV before then, but certainly like early on in me buying Thin Lizzy albums, this was an early acquisition. The other thing I have is I know I didn't buy a lot of Thin Lizzy albums until after I started work, and there was a guy who worked in a different lab than me who'd often, when I was going to college in the evenings, because we were sent to college from the place I worked, like one day a week and one evening a week, he'd often see me standing waiting for the bus, and he'd stop and pick me up, and he was a big Lizzy fan. And so I got to listen to a lot of the Thin Lizzy albums before I bought them. But this is definitely one of the albums I had very early on. But like I said, must have bought it sometime before 81. Fantastic album. The classic lineup: Lynott, Gorham, Robertson, Brian Downey. There's a saxophone solo by John Earl, Dancing in the Moonlight. Harmonica on Baby Drives Me Crazy. Huey Lewis and the News and the band Clover were touring as support to the band around the time that this album was recorded. So it's one of those albums as well. There's a little bit of, I don't know whether the contention around controversy. And there's another album on the list that we'll come on to as well that falls into that category. It's about how much overdubbing was done in the studio. Now, the album was recorded in London, Philadelphia and Toronto between 76 and 77. And Brian Robertson actually left shortly after the release of this album. But, not surprisingly, it's got all the like classic Thin Lizzy era classics on it. So things like Jailbreak, Emerald, Rosalie, Cowgirl Song, which is a little bit at the end of Rosalie, where they do a sort of refrain which is very much based on the cowboy song. Although, if you've read any of the stories surrounding sort of Thin Lizzy and Phil Lynott, you'll know that there's lots of interesting stories around songs and how they were put together and how they may have had different names, and there's slow versions of some songs and fast versions of songs that were tried out in live scenarios. What else we got here? Dancing in the Moonlight, Massacre, Still in Love with You, cowboy song, but always back in town, Don't Believe a Word. That's the one I'm thinking of with the slow and the fast version. This is the new normal speed or the fast version one. There's a slower blues version of this, which did that. I'm trying to remember if that cropped up on the Gary Moore album or not. Back on the Streets. I've certainly seen him do it live on Old Grey Whistle Test with a slow start and then speed it up. I'm trying to remember, there was a album track on here which at the time I don't think was on any album that I was aware of. It almost sounded like something they'd put together when they were rehearsing live. But yeah, classic album. So moving on, so that was June 1978. October 1978. AC/DC, If You Want Blood, You've Got It. So, again, bought this album sometime between 79 and 81, I think. This is just a regular, it's not a double album. So it would have been the last thing, so Highway to Hell was after that. So I'm just getting my bearings on this because so we had the live album and then Highway to Hell, and then obviously after Highway to Hell, that's when Bon Scott died. Only live album with Bon Scott as lead vocalist. There is another album, is it like live at Atlantic Studios, which I've heard. I'm not sure around time when that was recorded, but that was recorded to a really small audience in a studio. Now, the story behind this, and this is why I've got the maps up. So here we go. This is my home village. This is where I grew up. Place in the UK called Forest Row, and I lived. See if I can find. Here we go. So this over here is Ashdown Forest. Let me zoom out. Look at that, yeah. So I've got Ashdown Forest. On Ashdown Forest, there's also a couple of golf courses, and over here, the cricket pavilion stroke football pitch. So I lived down here on Highgate Road. So the cool thing was that there was one more road, and then you were on to the cricket pitch and Ashdown Forest and the golf course. So it was great. And what used to happen is all my friends, we used to meet up. I had a massive group of friends. We used to meet up at the weekends or during the week and hang out and cause havoc on Ashdown Forest and all around here. So most of my friends sort of came from around this area and down here in Forest Row. And where I'm going with this story is I had some friends that lived on the Hartfield Road, fairly far down the Hartfield Road. So there's a couple of ways from my house here to here that you could go. And one way is to sort of walk across the forest and then go down here, one of these things. That's quite a nice walk. But another way, and the way I used to go, is you can sort of see there's a connection of roads, there's a cut through here, and eventually takes you onto Hartfield Road. So this was often a way I'd go there. And the reason why this is connected with AC/DC, and I told this story on my podcast, but without the aid of a map, is this house, one of these houses here. I used to walk past it on around sort of Sunday afternoon, Sunday lunchtime, and whoever was in the house, they'd have the front window like just down a bit. This was in the days of, if anybody knows what a sash window is, like where it's the window's in two parts and you sort of move the window up and down, and it has this cord in it which sort of counterbalances it somehow. So it locks in position just automatically. You can sort of move it up and down, and then you can push it all the way up or push it down and lock it. So it would always be partly open, and there would be AC/DC like blaring out, and invariably this album, if you want, like, you've got it. Certainly I went past numerous times and there was a whole lot of Rosie blaring out, or Let There Be Rock, or Riff Raff. And some of the tracks definitely sounded like we're in the studio, but there were certainly times I went by and I thought, no, that's the live album. And I was familiar enough with AC/DC because of Bon Scott's voice to like recognise what that album was, even though I didn't own it. So off the back of being exposed to AC/DC while I was walking backwards and forwards to my friends, I ended up purchasing this. And again, it's like a gateway drug, live albums. It gets you familiar with them, and then you start tracing through and going, okay, well, I wonder what album this is on, and then you start looking through albums at your record store, and you might notice that, oh look, there's 2 or 3 tracks off of there, say off of Power Age, or you can see here there's 4 tracks from Let There Be Rock. So you'd sort of hedge your bets. Well, I already like those tracks, so I'm going to buy Let There Be Rock, and I'll probably like the rest. And that happened a lot with when I get to Unleashed in the East as well. Next up, we've got Tokyo Tapes. I think I might have told this story when I went through one of my Eudaimonia episodes. So when I stayed on 1 year in the 6th form, someone joined the school from another school, the school that didn't have a 6th form. So they were going to stay on a year and then go to community college. And I got to know them, and we used to hang out in our classroom when we had like a study period, and we'd listen to he brought in Tokyo Tapes by the Scorpions and Cheap Trick's live album, live at Budokan, which actually I should have had that as a honourable mention actually. So verbally I have that as an honourable mention, yeah, live at Budokan. And then also one of the Kiss solo albums, I can't remember which one, which he had on tape. We used to listen to this, and through just every week listening to Tokyo Tapes, eventually I went out and bought my own copy. And again, we've got a double album here. A great, although this is relatively speaking fairly early on in their career, because at this point, Uli Roth is still the lead guitarist. This is before oh god dear me, I should have looked a lot of this up before I did this actually, because I had a feeling I might have problems with names, such as getting old. Yeah, so where are we? So I'm just trying to find Animal Magnetism, Love Drive. Right, so Love Drive. Oh, there we go. Matthias Japs, that was it. I saw the Scorpions in New Brunswick actually a few years ago. Awesome live. So back to Tokyo Tapes. So of course then, after listening to it, buying this, another one where sort of going through and being able to see some tracks and then looking at other albums and thinking, well, what albums contain like the most amount of tracks of the live album. Again, because it's an earlier album, I couldn't do that with the later ones, but as a result of listening to the Friday Rock Show, I got to hear Love Drive and Animal Magnetism when it was released, so not such a big problem. But I can remember buying the second two albums, so that would be Fly to the Rainbow and In Trance, I think, as like some sort of weird double compilation album, but with just the two albums on it. It was released by RCA as like a 2-disc bringing together, and I don't think anywhere on the album it actually said that it was Fly to the Rainbow and In Trance, but that was the next one I bought after getting hold of Tokyo Tapes. Yeah, great memories of this. Another double album. Few things as well difficult to track down. So where is it? Is there? I think that's a B-side to a single. And I believe this is off the first album, In Search of the Peace of Mind. Which was the one before Fly to the Rainbow, and that had Michael Schenker on it, on that one. On to Ufo, Strangers in the Night. This came out a lot later than I'd thought, actually. So 1979, speaking of Michael Schenker. So the last recording with Michael Schenker on, in terms of this one, it's more problems with Schenker refusing to record any overdubs. Great version of Dr. Doctor on here, and the first album I bought by the band. This another connection to secondary school. So this must have been when I was in the sixth form. There was a guy in a lot of my classes, I can't remember his name, and he had one of those workman's, so this was before the days of the modern backpacks. So most people at school either had those sports bags, like the Adidas sports bag, the shoulder ones, or the ones with two handles on them. And this guy had what I would call a workman's knapsack. If anybody knows what I mean, they're the sort of yellow ones with the straps with the brass endings on them. And he had one of those as like a knapsack. And he'd always have an album poking out the back. I don't know why he took them into school, because he couldn't play them on anything. Because at the point I saw these, it wasn't when I was in the sixth form, so he didn't have an access to a record player. So I'm not quite sure what that was all about. Maybe he was lending them to people, I don't know. But he always used to have this album, and he had like a whole load of band badges on the back. He had this album. He had, what was the other one now? Breakfast in America. And I think it must have been the live AC/DC album as well, If You Want Blood. I do remember him having badges on the back, but what he'd done, that thing, he'd done the band logo in blue pen on the back of his knapsack. most of them, but I remember seeing some badges as well. But yeah, because I remember being quite impressed at how he did that bit on the UFO logo. I don't know if you can see it, you know, where it... No, it's not going to come up very clearly, but I think if you know the UFO logo, you know the bit I mean. I was quite impressed on how he'd managed to do that without messing it up. And of course, yeah, another one which, first album by the band that I bought, and a great gateway into tracking down subsequent studio albums. I've also got I've got this on, so with these, all of these that I'm going to mention today, I actually have on vinyl. But I think possibly all of these I also have on CD, so I have like the extended versions of, and of course I've got Spotify so I can stream these. So I've sort of heard all the various incarnations, but like anything, you know, you tend to prefer the first one you heard. So I like this one here. I know on later ones they sort of added on cherry and various other things you can see, I think. And you got the deluxe edition with there's various other live versions as well. Wow, that is deluxe. It's what I like about Wikipedia. It gives a good breakdown of all different people that played. They actually also name check on here. There's a name check to Paul Chapman. So he actually left the band. Michael Schenker left the band during the tour. And Paul Chapman, who had been in the band for a brief period of time, there's a version of UFO that had both Schenker and Paul Chapman in it. And you can, if you go onto Spotify, you might be able to find a BBC recording of that period. It's really interesting to listen to with both of them on there. Yeah, so I was always a bit suspicious that, you know, is there some Paul Chapman guitar on this album? I don't think there is, as far as I know, and it certainly doesn't mention it in the credits. But I did know a little bit about all the shenanigans at the time, and I often did wonder, you know, is there some stuff of his on there? I don't think there is. If you know otherwise, then yeah, let me know in the comments section. Unleashed in the East. So my youngest brother was big into Judas Priest, and we used to listen to this album all the time. Another great gateway drug, although it's often referred to as Unleashed in the Studio because of all the contention about how this was put together. Last released to feature Les Binks, brilliant drummer. Is Les Binks playing in KK Downing's Priest? I think he is, isn't he? I think that's right, yeah. So yeah, great album. Lots of stuff here that is caused us to really go down the rabbit hole in terms of trying to find the albums that these were off. And as a consequence of this album and tracking later other or earlier albums down, Sad Wings of Destiny became my favourite Judas Priest album. The first album my brother bought was Killing Machine on cassette. I remember that because I remember us getting back from buying it, and we put it straight on my dad's really nice hi-fi with this really nice cassette player he had on it. And we terrorised the family for the whole afternoon, just playing Killing Machine over and over again. But the other interesting thing is some of these, like this one, The Green Man Alishi, wasn't on the version of Killing Machine that we bought. I don't think. Am I right about that? Yeah, I think I'm right, because Killing Machine has Hellbent for Leather on it. And this was renamed Hellbent for Leather for the American market, I believe, just from my memory. I could probably look this up actually by going back here. I think there was a rename. Yeah. There we go. So they added after the fact, but that all was through us when we heard the live we were listening to the live album, and it's like, well, where's their version? Because we knew it was a cover, but we didn't know which album. Well, and it wasn't till a lot later on, when I had access to the American pressings, that I tracked down the version of this. And obviously, it's included on all those sort of CD reissues that that they did, was it in the 2000s, I think. Annoyingly, I actually have a copy of this which includes the 7-inch single, and I can't find that single anywhere, and it's really annoying. And I know I had it. Well, I remember when I bought it at a record store. I do have a copy of this without and it was just released as well without that. My brother had the cassette version of this, which had the extra tracks on it as well. So, yeah. But, and just going back to the map, one thing me and my youngest brother used to do, we bonded over the new wave of British heavy metal. That was our big sort of shared interest. And what we used to do, we used to walk down, this is a local railway line here, I think, yeah. So we used to walk from our house along the railway line, this is now like a nature trail, to East Grinstead. And we go like shopping, we go music shopping in East Grinstead. And I always remember that because there were quite a number of Judas Priest albums were bought as a result of that shopping trip. I think that's where my interest in walking comes from, is constantly, we always used to walk backwards and forwards to East Grinstead down the railway line and not take the bus. It meant more money to spend on music and records. Yeah. So that's the top 5. So Live and Dangerous, If You Want Blood, Tokyo Tape, Strangers in the Night, Unleashed in These, in no particular order. Honourable mention, Live Killers, so Queen. If you've listened to my music podcast, you'll know that Queen started out as my all-time favourite band back in the day. So this was the only live album I bought, where I bought it literally when it came out, the week it came out. Saved up for this. So I probably may have even bought this before the other ones. I loved it when it came out, but I do find it a little bit patchy in places. But it's a great listening experience, and it has both the versions of, where is it now? So there's the fast version of We Will Rock You, and there is the slow version. And this version, if anybody's curious, there is a BBC recording of this where they've got, it starts out as the slow version and blends into this. Yeah, there was about 4 tracks, and there's a number of BBC sessions they did, and one of them was around the time of the whatever album We Will Rock You was on. So that would be News of the World. Yeah, News of the World. It's coming to me. I'm just trying to think this would have... So they did a tour. Does it say here? So it was a jazz tour. Was it after that that they did the Crazy Tour, where they played the really small venues? I think I'm right, yeah. Again, I'm doing this sort of 100% from memory. But I thought between the Game Tour and this jazz tour, there was a thing called the Crazy Tour, which was all really small venues. So yeah, so obviously this is a shot of them from the jazz tour. Although, didn't they have a Queen often, before they did a tour, and I'm assuming a lot of big bands do that, would like rent out a big like live stage somewhere and actually rehearse in preparation for the tour, and then they'd have all their like light show rigged up, that sort of thing. But yeah, lots of classics on here. Oh no, it does actually list where they had overdubs as well. And this was another album when it came out. I remember just seeing this hanging up in the local record store. So there we have it. I rambled on for quite a while there, but lots of stories. And part of me doing this and me not doing any research is I am trying to do this thing where it helps me to sort of like recount things just off the top of my head. I find it's really useful in terms of my sort of keeping my sort of cognitive ability. I think as you get older, as I sort of proactively to sort of actively try and remember things without relying too much on cues, and sort of helps out there with any senior moments you might have later in life. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that. That was my top 5 live albums. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next video.